Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another wonderful Wednesday webinar. And the wisdom being dispensed this week is from our old friend Dan Simon from Interim Spaces, fantastic charity that's been doing similar to ourselves over the years, but has been creating some amazing community spaces, art spaces, and meanwhile youth spaces. But moving on into longer term community spaces is Dan's going to tell us a bit about. But I think they were the winners of the Property Awards 2021, and they've done some fantastic interim uses of spaces. So I think Dan's going to show us some photos and things and have a chat through. So over to you, Dan. Thank you very much for coming and sharing your wisdom. Over.
It's my pleasure. I don't know how much wisdom I can share, but I'll do my best. So yeah, Interim Spaces had its genesis in squatting. This is how I know Pete. Um, in 2002, I started squatting in London, and I was a squatter for about uh, a decade, almost 10 years of flitting from property to property, annoying landlords. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time. We must have occupied about 36 properties. Um, we were very conscientious squatters, so we would target end of life housing stock, largely owned by housing associations, and the occasional commercial building. Um, a few years of doing this, it provided, first of all, an incredible insight into how uh, people taking property into their own hands could really unlock potential. Um, the most amazing people and the most amazing groups use squatting as a platform to really get places in life they might not otherwise have been able to do so if they had been forced into uh, menial, say, service roles just to cover their rent. So it offered a fantastic amount of freedom to people. And we had a little group of reprobates. We were very good at talking to landlords, of the people who owned the buildings that we squatted. Um, and we made them see sense. So we would get in touch with them and we would say, look, this housing association property's been empty for 4 years. In that time, you've had three groups of squatters come and go who you've evicted. We're looking after the place. We're saving you money. Um, we're not causing a nuisance, and of course, having the property occupied, um, it's not a target for less scrupulous intruders. It's not a target for vandalism. It's not a target for crime. The backyard isn't being used as a fly tipping site anymore, etc., etc. And we would, most of the time, we would uh, get permission to stay, usually in the form of a verbal agreement. One place we were in Balham, a beautiful townhouse there. We were in for 4 years by consent of the landlord because we approached them and negotiated a license to stay. So after 10 years of this, after seeing so much potential unlocked, um, the thought, the obvious thing that occurred to me was that this would be something really wonderful to be able to do on the longer term with a bit more security. Um, I'd been, I lived in Peckham. We took over a squat in Peckham, and as there were 21 of us living in a large terraced house with one working tap, which was in the basement, and it dripped. We all got sick of it, and so we handed it over to a young lady called Hannah Barry. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Hannah Barry Gallery in Peckham, Frank's Cafe. But Hannah Barry's gallery started life at 72 Lyndhurst Way. We handed it over to her. She ran a successful gallery, and that gallery went on to got a permanent place near the station in Peckham. And from that gallery came Frank's Cafe. From Frank's Cafe came a whole plethora of cultural activity and venues. And it demonstrates, the transformative effect that um, people can have when they have access to property that they're not paying rent for, or that they're not paying very much rent for. So I'm sure you're all aware, I don't know how many of you are in London. The prices in the cities are absolutely extortionate now. I don't know how anyone gets by. But anyway, the after a few years of squatting, I started up a group called the Oubliette. Um, we started squatting commercial buildings. We started in 2009. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Oubliette. It was quite some time ago. Um, and the purpose was very simple. It wasn't really, it had a very, very simple remit, really, and that was to use vacant commercial spaces to allow platforms for emerging talent, to showcase the work of new artists, to have a community hub and a cultural venue to show theatre shows, um, and to just, show the public um, just how much value is tied up in buildings that are left to rot. So we had 7 properties in central London over the course of 2 years. The first being an English language school. We had a cinema, we had a basement theatre, which got reviewed in The Guardian. We had a show in there that did really well. Um, we had all kinds of weird and wonderful and wacky and pretty disorganized events. But it really worked. And we went on for each property that we squatted over the course of the 7 years, we got better and better at what we were doing until ultimately we landed in the 7th property in 2000, at the end of 2010, was the former Limelight Club on the corner of Shaftesbury Avenue and Charing Cross. So it's a great big Gothic church, which most recently was the Walkabout. Um, so we occupied that in the winter of 2010. Squatters like to say, when you enter into a property, when you go before the judge, you usually say, Your Honor, the door was open and the key was lying somewhere convenient. In this case, it was absolutely true. The door was open. We walked into this venue, and squatted it. Um, Over the December period, we ran a whole host of events, cabaret, you name it, and it was a great success. And the following week, I got a call from the Netherlands, and it was the owner of the church. It was an investment company, and they had sent their managing agents over to the event, and they had an amazing time. They stayed till 4 o'clock, got really pissed. But the owners said they cancelled the court summons. They were taking us to court to regain possession of the property under an IPO, interim possession order. They cancelled that, and they said, "We're working with a solicitor to get you a license. We'd like you to stay," which was very, very exciting because that's exactly what we were hoping to get. Um, so a month passed. I was living on the top floor of this Gothic thing, working at the framework for a venue. And then a Russian oligarch came along and bought the bloody place from underneath us. So we lost that opportunity. But losing that opportunity was the beginning of something else, and that was an idea for an organization that could take on properties from the very onset, legitimately um, knocking on the door of landlords as opposed to breaking in, which admittedly takes a lot of the fun out of it, but still is a much more sustainable way of running, operating, developing um, uh, a venue. So it was very, very difficult getting started. It took about, no lie, it took 2 years before we got our first property. Um, After squatting, I did there was a in between period where I got on a bursary funded course at the National Theatre and learned about arts leadership. I worked for Theatre Delicatessen for a few years, helping manage their properties. Um, and then I started Interim Spaces as a charity with some old squatter friends. Um, and it was,
Dan,
yeah.
Dan, could you just say a little bit about Theatre Delicatessen? I remember around the time we were in Hackney, just what they were doing, getting
Well, they were
buildings for.
basically just macing with each other. It was a great big screw fest. And on the side, they did theatre. Um, Theatre Delicatessen were a wonderful company. It was helmed by Roland Smith and Jessica Brewster, who both, no, you're recording this, aren't you? I won't say anymore. So they were wonderful theatre makers, a really talented couple. Um, and they
It's
had
fine. Don't worry about the French, ladies and gentlemen.
they they had gone from a pop-up theatre on Regent Street to being handed the keys to the former BBC studios on Marylebone High Road, a vast building of about 140,000 square foot. And I had had a tacit agreement with Roland when I was running the oubliette that whoever got the next big building, we would join forces. He would come to us or we would go to him. And it ended up being Theatre Delhi. So he gave me a call and he said, right, we've got this huge building. We're going to be making a theatre in it. But we've got all this space. Do you want to come on board and help us with it? So I did. And I managed a part of the building that had the workspace in it, which was great fun. And that's actually how I met my current partner, who I have two children with. So it was an investment that paid off. It was a great learning curve. Theatre Delhi well, it was now Roland and Jessica have both left and it's since become a rather turgid. I think I think unfortunately it looks rather to have gone quite downhill. But back in the day, it was a very fun place to work and indeed live as I did. I practically lived there. I just stopped squatting and I was living on a boat, and the office was a great deal more comfortable. So yes, I was with them for a while, and while I was with them, I started developing interim spaces, and um, it started off with a huge amount of research, but in getting an idea of who we were, what we wanted, and what putting together brochures and putting together stuff that really sold the idea of what it was that we were doing with the aim of luring in landlords. Um, what I've learned since then is landlords really, corporate ones at least, they don't really give a shit about what good you purport to do. For them, the biggest incentive is really saving money and a few tick boxes on their CSR. So anyway, long story short, hundreds, perhaps, quite a lot more than hundreds of emails um, and many meetings. I developed a strategy that seemed to work, that really seemed to help us engage, and that was basically I would target councils in London boroughs, and I would start with the leader of the council, and I'd explain as briefly as I could what it was we wanted to do, and I'd ask for an introduction to a suitable cabinet member or council officer that could help us um, continue the discussion with a view to taking on council space or being connected with um, landlords that they knew of who had problem properties. And eventually that did pay off. I emailed back then, this was quite a while ago now, I emailed, I think about 2016. Everyone's changed now at Westminster City Council, but it was Westminster City Council who responded. I had a lot of meetings with Hackney. I always thought we were going to end up in a Labour borough like Hackney or Walthamstow or Haringey or somewhere like that. And I had endless meetings with these councils, but nothing came to fruition, mostly because when you have a meet I, for example, in meetings that I had with Haringey and Hackney, um, you tend to be in a room with a lot of department heads. So you've got not heads necessarily, but officers from respective departments. So economy and finance and property. And you usually find officers are very on board with your ideas and very agreeable, but getting a decision out of them is extremely difficult. Now, what was different with Westminster is that when I emailed the leader of the council, I was referred to the head of economy, a wonderful guy. And I think you have to be lucky. I think we were lucky with Greg Ward, who was the head of economy back then. He's not anymore, but back then he was, and he was a very approachable man with imagination. He could see what it was that we wanted to do, and he could see how that could be a benefit to the council and how it could be a benefit to Westminster residents. I had a meeting with the economy team, um, and they introduced us to the Portman estate. Now, the Portman estate are notoriously difficult to get a um, to get interested. But they responded to the council. They had a building on Edgware Road that was part of a block that was being um, uh, uh, demolished to make way for a new development. And they were interested in an interim solution. So through Westminster City Council, we were introduced to the Portman estate. And then fairly soon after that, we took up a lease at 136 George Street, and that was our first property. And we ploughed an enormous amount of time and energy into that. Um, it was a very derelict property that we really turned around with a lot of volunteers, a donation of um, about £10,000 worth of Faro ball paint, which lasted us for about 6 years. In fact, I think we still have some. Um, So, and that was our showroom. We used that property. We filled it with some with makers and artists um, under license agreements. It did not make any money. None of our projects have ever really made any money. Um, but the purpose of George Street purely and entirely was to sell the vision, and we did that. Following on from George Street, we attained more property in Westminster. The most significant project that we have operated and continue to operate is the workspace at 41 Whitcomb Street near Leicester Square, which is a two-story office block, about 8,000 square foot, has 100 members, about 40 small businesses. And it's a wonderful creative community. And we've just signed a new 5-year lease. We were only meant to be there for 2 years. So that was a real coup for us, and it has been the launch pad for many other projects. And it's also been the launch pad for where we are currently, which is we are slowly moving away from meanwhile use, and we're now focusing on raising funds to purchase, renovate, and activate failing high street uh, retail and commercial units. And we've just achieved that in a small town in Somerset called Shepton Mallet. Shepton's an interesting place. It's a small town of about 11,000 people. It's remote, but it's also very well connected to the West Country. Nowhere is too far away. The beach is 40 minutes away. Bristol and Bath are 40 minutes away. And places like Shepton are becoming increasingly attractive as people start to leave the cities because the cities are becoming so expensive. So you have this, as what we're seeing in Shepton, I think is what's also happening in many other small towns around the UK. Um, People, despite the draw of the city, a change in work culture, enabled by advances in technology, allow people to work remotely or in a hybrid fashion from just about anywhere. And if you want a better style, if you want a better quality of life, where houses are cheaper, you can actually afford better schooling, better air quality. People are starting to look at places like this. In fact, what's happening, what I perceive to be happening, is similar to what was happening in London in the in the 80s, 90s, early thousands. People migrating from Islington to Peckham, um, uh, from wealthier boroughs where the prices were going up to poorer boroughs where you could afford your rents and um, develop your enterprise or your craft or your art. Particularly, of course, for people involved in the creative and artistic industries. Um, there is a pattern of migration as property prices rise, as rents increase. Um, People on lower incomes and largely from the creative and artistic communities seek to migrate to areas which they can afford to live. And commonly in London, you'd find that artists and creatives and people on lower incomes would move farther out from the centre. But I think what we're seeing now is people from the cities, from London, from Bristol, from Manchester, moving into more peripheral environments, more regional territories, which is really, really interesting to see and not entirely unsurprising. I think we all know people that have gone to Margate or Edinburgh or Canada or Berlin and places like that, and it's largely because the it's becoming increasingly difficult to work and live. So one of the things that our organization does is we at Pop Up Leicester Square, where the rate to hire property is about £110 per square foot. We sell our spaces for £1.20 per square foot. And that is all inclusive of business rates, that's all inclusive of bills. And what that means is that um, if you are, say, an accessory designer or you've got a small startup, you can hire an office space from us for about £150 a month, all inclusive, where, if you were hiring it on even tier B rates, you'd be paying about 4,500. But that's because of the area that we're in near Leicester Square. But the being affordable is incredibly important. Um, and our prices are some of the lowest in not only the UK but actually in Europe. We've had members go to Berlin and Spain who haven't been able to find prices that match the prices we offer, and I think that's a really important thing. Um,
That's saying something, isn't it? Because a lot of artists and creatives in London were leaving London due to the expense and going to Berlin.
yeah,
That's a good sign.
yeah, and
Confidence will come up there.
I think there's, England's got a lot going for it despite its problems, and I think it's very important that we find ways of retaining our creative and cultural talent. It's not good if our makers and our artists and our creators and our ideas makers all are leaving. Where are we going to be in 10 years' time if that continues to be the case? And it very much is a trend. The creative exodus really is a thing, and it has been for many years, and it's not slowing down. So, you know, so yes, that's kind of where we are. We're moving into becoming a social commercial landlord where we take over buildings. To give you, I know I've been warbling on for ages, but just to summarize where we are now, we see ourselves as a social commercial landlord, um, and our new role involves buying property and giving it the retail aspect of it, if there is a retail aspect to it, away for free, rent free, bills free, business rates free, completely free, plus a capital grant for up to 9 months to help stimulate local economy by allowing people with ideas to innovate without being oppressed by rents and rental agreements. So the property that we bought in Shepton Mallet it's a beautiful historic building. We won £264,000 to buy it, renovate it. £24,000 of that covers the first year revenue costs. So the renovations finish in a couple of weeks, and then we'll start to introduce users. So the top floor is a higher space, which we will let out for affordable rates and give for free to local facilitators who return the best value for the community. So hopefully we're going to bring in music teachers in stringed and wind instruments to we'll give them the space for free, and in return they give affordable rates to local children on up, which will help bring people to the town centre, and offer a cultural opportunity in education and music to young people, which I think is very important. One of the many things that young people need. And then the retail unit, retail occupiers get rolling 3-month licenses up to a maximum of 9 months, rent-free and bill-free, during which time we engage with local landlords of empty shops so that when the retail participant succeeds, they have somewhere to move into. And the idea is that ideas that work in the incubator move on to other empty shops and continue to grow their business. We want to see if this model works, because if it does, this is a pilot for us. This could very easily take off in many other town centres across the region. So now I've warbled on for ages. Does anyone have any questions?
Absolutely fantastic, Dan. What an inspiring journey. Yeah, really, really a lot to learn there. So, if anyone's got any questions, there's a reaction button down the bottom. I know. Did you want to show any pictures, Dan, of any of the bits?
Yeah, I could show
Yeah,
you some pictures. Let me
yeah.
have a
So we'll
look and
see a
see
few
what I
pictures and
got.
then think of a question if you go on, folks. And there's a reaction button down the bottom. You can raise a hand like that. We can see who's one, two, three. But I've got a couple come up there. But what an amazing, successful model, really, that's working from interim spaces to. I love the idea of helping giving new groups a leg up, to have a space for 3 to 9 months and then they're moving into empty shops, kind of like a creation factory, filling up empty high streets. That's genius, Dan. Brilliant.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how clever it is. It might fall on its ass, to be honest with you. But I mean, the thing is that owning the property gives us the flexibility to innovate ourselves. So if something doesn't work,
uh-huh.
we can simply try something else and and see if that works.
How much did you
So
bought Shepton Mallet for?
we bought it for £140,000. I'm going to show you guys some pictures in a minute. I'm just trying to
Okay.
like photos things
So
being really
just to
filled.
say, folks, what we're trying to do here is gradually, it's been a discussion around the network for the last, 6, 9 months, a year, that we have to move out of meanwhile spaces quite quick, sometimes relatively to longer term communities. We might be out in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And how do we transition from having to move out of a space that we've built up with lots of creativity, arts, and community events and workshops and education and things? If we have to move out every year, it's quite a mission. So if we can, in the long term, work towards buying back community benefit society, community land trust, longer term buildings for the community is a longer term dream for the wider network we've been chatting about. Dan, you got some pictures here.
I
Lovely.
got some pictures. So hold on, I can see somebody with a hand up. How does this work? How do you do the
So,
Philip, I think.
Phil, go for it if you want a question. Phil in sunny Carmarthen.
Yeah. Yeah, you can come back to me after you've shown the pictures if that's easy.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is
You know
the build.
the 264,000 that you ripped to buy the property, the Mallet. How
Yeah. Sorry.
Was it how do you raise it? Was that the question, Philip? You cut out slightly, Phil.
Okay, I think that's what Philip's question was. The answer to your question is I started a year and a half ago. I had my first meeting with the landlord of the property. The landlord of the property is a major landlord in the town here, owns a lot of property, and he does not have a great reputation. A lot of his buildings that he's owned for many years are falling into a state of disrepair, which is having a real effect on community morale, the look and feel of the town centre. And I thought, having lived in the area for 7 years, this would be actually a really good place to start a project. So I met with the landlord, and he agreed to sell us. He showed us what he had, and we had a discussion about this property at 10 Market Place, and he agreed to sell it to us off the book. Um, with that agreement, that verbal agreement in place, I, I started seeking funds. Um, Thankfully, at the time I started seeking funds, there was a fund already in place from the Department of Levelling Up called the Community Ownership Fund. It's a fund it's a pool of money of 150 million pounds that has been running for the last 2 years and has 1 year left. Um, so my first application was to the Community Ownership Fund. I'm not going to lie, it was a difficult application. It's not just a lengthy application, but you also have to put together a business plan. So I've put together a 40, 50 page plan, um, meeting all of the criteria of the fund. Um, so the way the community ownership fund worked back then, it works differently now. The way it worked back then is that you would get the ownership fund would award you a grant of 50% of your ask, and you'd have to match fund the rest. So out of the £264,000, 120 or 144 of that came from the Community Ownership Fund. So we were successful in our application for the COF fund. There was 120 capital grant to buy the building and £24,000 for the first year revenue costs. And I match funded that by raising £120,000 from a local community fund, the Somerset Community Fund, which is a mixed investment. It's a £40,000 grant and an £80,000 loan that we have to repay over a 5 year term. The COF grant has changed now. When we applied, the maximum you could apply for was £250,000. Now it's 2 million. You had to match fund 50%. Now you only have to match fund 20%. So you can buy more property and but only match fund 20% of the value, which is a significant development. So I think if any of you have property in your site, now is the time to apply for this fund, because the COF fund is probably a once in a, you know, it won't be. I can't see anything like this coming back. So if that
Thank you,
answers you. Sorry?
thank you very much.
You're welcome. So the building you can see in the picture here, the pink one, it's not pink anymore, with the Oriel Bay window and the worker at the retail door. That is 10 Market Place in Shepton Mallet. Shepton Mallet is a historic town. It's the town centre is struggling, but it's a beautiful town, full of historic buildings. I think it's got the highest number of historic buildings in a town in the UK. I could be wrong about that, but there are a huge. It's a historic town with an amazing history, and a strange name. So that's the property that we bought. And we started off, see if I can get you some pictures from when it was when we actually bought it. So that's us outside. So that's me and our painter and decorators below, and standing on the thing are our main contractors who are building repair specialists. And that's them working away. We tore up the floor and found a basement which had been was in a bit of a state, but we fixed it all up. We tore down a wall here and exposed a historic window seat, which we patched up with traditional lime and uh, built new surrounds for. Um, Exposed a rubble wall, which our contractors patched up and lime washed. This is the charity offices on the first floor. Um, so this is some of the renovation works that we've done. We've done a huge amount of work. The property was so derelict. Out here, we've had the stone wall repointed and the drainage rerouted. A lot of water was coming into the building. The walls are wet and they will be wet for several more months. But they're drying out now that our contractors have chiseled out a lot of the concrete and replaced the concrete with lime mortar. It's a grant. Yeah, the electric's completely redone, and all the lighting completely refitted. Um, that's our contractors up on the roof. I'll play you a video. I don't know how well this will stream for you, but we bought a drone. uh, they're the most annoying devices in the world, but they're really great to um, get some before and after pictures. So that's um, that's coming down. It's the market square with I think it's St. Catherine's Cross, and there are contractors making repairs to the chimney. Um, it's right next door to a really popular cafe called the Cheeky Bean. And that building there is the Amulet, which is a former theatre, which another group are raising funds to buy back. So there's a lot happening in this little town. Um, uh, it's the second floor where the higher space is going to be. That's the ground floor. So guttering. So we have spent with the actual repair work cost about £50,000. But then all the carpeting and plumbing and electrical work will be another 20. But we are all on budget and on time. Yeah, we changed that color. It was a little bit oppressive. Um, so yes, it's been very busy, an amazing learning curve, um, and really exciting for the charity. So I think my strong feeling is that groups that are currently involved with meanwhile use that have built up experience in the meanwhile use field have a I think the natural progression is to become actual landlords because we need social landlords, social commercial landlords in this country. Um, I don't know. I don't think I've ever met a landlord of a commercial building who was not an absolute greedy shit. And that the only way of really controlling of really helping to help people and help boost cultural and economic activity is for groups like us to own the properties that we carry out our activities in, or that we allow other groups to carry out meaningful activities in. I strongly feel that way. That's 10 Marketplace before we bought it. It had been empty for a couple of years.
So one of the ways that you've raised funds from previous meanwhiles is, I mean, some landlords will let you have a kind of, a sub agreement with some people to hire a space for a certain amount of time. You've made some funds from people, using
Yes, I mean,
space and built up funds to
yeah.
then move to kind of the ownership, community ownership model.
To be honest with you, the best I've found that, especially now with rising utility costs and the pressure that's putting on groups like us when it comes to delivering affordable work and development space, and other kinds of space too, is that for the meanwhile use model to really work, first of all, you really need a sizable enough property to accommodate a commercial side element. So at Pop Hub Leicester Square, we have one commercial anchor tenant. They pay a much higher rate, but that subsidizes the low cost workspace. Um, and I think for us, if we take on future meanwhile use projects, and we are actually taking on another meanwhile use project, part of that has to be at affordable commercial rates in order to stay on top of um, really unpredictable energy market, and other costs which are rising in other areas. So to ring fence yourself against unpredictable changes in the market, um, and unpredictable, yeah, you
Mm.
really need to be able to have higher paying tenants in the alongside your beneficiaries.
Uh-huh. So Simon there in Imagine Leeds who are looking for the next building. Done a lovely one for quite a while in the office. So Simon.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. That's really, really interesting. So the way that we got our first space was by saving the landlord. It was land securities. We saved them business rates, and we managed to get 100% rates relief from Leeds City Council.
Oh,
Uh,
that's great.
but you were just talking about sort of a commercial tenant that you as the manager of the space would have in there to help generate some income for your costs. I was under the impression that we couldn't do that if we're there as a charity that's getting that rates relief from the council. So yeah.
You can do that. You can do that if you can find a way of squeezing it into your charitable remit. So we release higher tier space to qualifying beneficiaries. So I'll give you an example. Our anchor tenant at Pop Pub is a climate charity who are very well funded. So we don't give them the market rate for their large space is about 4,500 up to about £7,000 a month. We charge them under £2,000. So we are charging them an affordable rate, much under the market rate, but high enough to subsidize the really low cost space that we offer in other parts of the building. So that is a very good point, Simon, but that is still within our charitable remit.
Okay, that's good. I think the reason I was put off of it was because our contract, our lease with for that space said we were not sublease.
So
Some
what you need
pieces
to
do say you can, some say you can't, but Dan's go for it, Dan expert, and then Poppy.
the main concern landlords have is that you will inadvertently create a tenancy, and you can get around that by getting it into your head of terms from the very onset that the landlord agrees to you licensing units in the space in a way that does not create exclusive possession. So it's very straightforward. I'm more than happy to send you some example documents, but that is an important thing to get into your head of terms before you come to the lease stage.
Right.
Um,
Mhm. Very, very. Take a direct contact, guys, and talk
Yeah.
with Dan afterwards. He's very knowledgeable. He's one of my gurus that I go to. Sean in Sunny Worthing, and then Poppy in Waltham Forest. Sean, and at back. I don't know if Phil, you still got your hand up, but I'll let the others go because you've had one go. Sean.
All right, yeah. Hi, Dan. Thanks for the talk.
Hi.
Sorry about the camera. I can't seem to get it working tonight.
Sorry.
Yeah, we've got a meanwhile use. We've had it for a year. Hopefully, we're hanging on to it until the middle of the year. But we've already started talking to a few other local groups about this community ownership fund. I didn't realise it was coming to an end, so we may miss it. I had thought, maybe mistakenly, maybe you can clarify, that you had to identify one of these assets of community value or get it registered as an asset of community value first.
No, you don't have to do that. The main requirement is that the building that you are intending to purchase served a community purpose before it was, say, empty. So the building that we bought was not an ACV. It was a shop with offices above. And our main case for the bid was that it was a heritage building falling into disrepair, and it affected community morale and civic pride, and also that the landlord wanted to convert it, the top floor offices into residential, so you would lose this historic component of it. It had been a shop for 200 years, and to lose it to residential flats would be a great loss to the town. But also it was a shop that was empty. So what the COF funders look for is, first of all, that you're a landlord is willing to sell you the property. They don't want to waste time on projects that are unlikely to crystallize. They want to see that you have an agreement with a landlord that he wants to sell. They want to see a valuation for the property, so you will need to get the property valued by an independent surveyor. You'll also need to get a condition survey on the property by a qualified surveyor. And once you have those in place and a written agreement from the landlord that he wants to sell, then you are on a really good footing to pushing through your bid. Okay. But it does not have to be an ACV.
It does. So it could be a sort of regular high street shop.
It could be a regular high street shop. It could be a pub. It could be a former library. It could be, it could be a former community hall, or even a church. I think, as long as it served a community purpose in the past, then it's eligible.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
That's good to know. Poppy, did you have a question there? And I've probably got a question for you about Waltham Forest.
Yeah, sort of following on, I guess, because I know there's been news even this week, I think, about changes to planning regulations. I think the news this week was particularly about brownfield sites. But do you think, is it likely to become harder to make sure places aren't turned into flats? And
I think you're right. I think it's going to become a lot harder, because I think legislation is being pushed through, or already has come through, to make it easier for shops to be turned into residential units. This is as part of an effort to mitigate derelict and stagnant high streets, but I think it's going to have completely the opposite effect. Converting shops into flats is really going to kill, I think, a lot of town centres. So that I know that is something that's going through at the moment. It might be worth researching, but I do recall that it is going to become easier to convert shops to residences, empty shops to residences.
Do you know any sort of guidance that you have, how to make the case to local authorities that things shouldn't be sold off to the highest bidder? Is there a good source to go to for that sort of?
The local authorities have limited means to intervene. They have some powers, but not very many. I think if it is, I think a good route is always registering a property as an asset of community value. It is quite a process to do that, but once you've done that, it puts, I mean, it gives the property some significance. It highlights to the landlord that this is a property which is of cultural importance to the town, which can put pressure on landlords. It also means that if the landlord wants to sell, the community groups get first option to buy. I think there's a number. I think, to be honest with you, I think there's always direct action as well. I'm a big advocate of direct action. I think a lot of change can happen through direct action, and I think that one of the things about landlords in particular is that property ownership is a very opaque industry. It allows people to very easily hoard property, reap the benefits from it, act unscrupulously and even unlawfully, and get away with it. Landlords do not like light. They do not like being the center of attention. They do not like being in the news or being the subject of protests, or community action. So, I mean, there's ways of putting pressure on landlords not to behave in certain ways. But yes, I think that's really a question of approach. But yes, I mean, I can't really think off the top of my head what powers councils have.
Yeah, maybe councils isn't the right area to be
I
talking
mean,
to. I don't know.
a conversion from commercial to residential, I think it still would have to go through planning. So there would be some ability there to get involved in planning and raise objections and get councillors on board. So, you know, if you see a shop that the owner is planning to turn into residential, I think the first step would be to get in touch with your local councillors for the ward where the property is in, and say, look, we need to stop this from happening. And put up a fight when it got to planning. I'm sure there's lots of different ways.
I hope that helps there, Poppy. So just to say a little bit there, because we're coming towards the end of time, but you know, one thing I've learned there from Dan's presentation is, you know, starting with council leaders. So I'm guessing you probably emailed them because you can't always ring them, but and then asked to be linked to a cabinet member person responsible for something. And one of the key point takeaway for me is there with Dan is that landlord asked them for landlords they knew with problem properties. So every council will know that there is this dilapidated shop, this dilapidated church, post office, that maybe there's been a few complaints or a few issues or whatever. And every different council has different kind of names for their different departments or positions, and it's a bit difficult sometimes. But what we've said in the handbook is trying to find the property manager, the estates manager, but sometimes, as Dan said there, it's actually the head of the economy or the head of finance. Finding that right person. The Art Space, Life Space guys we're going to have on another time to come and do a presentation in Bristol. They went to Bristol and similar story. And then they met this woman, Ruth Essex, who worked with the council, and her job was about property, and she managed to get them about 10 different buildings, and they've done very well. They're creating a lot of really good creative spaces. So what did you email the council leader first and then
I emailed, yeah. My advice from my experience would be always, whether you're going for the council, whether you want to engage the council, or whether you want to engage, say, corporate landlords, start at the top. Start with the CEO. I know that might sound ridiculous, but start at the top, work your way down. I wouldn't bother with, you know, low run council officers. I think you'd be wasting your time. I wouldn't start with you know, asset managers for a corporate firm. They don't really give a shit. you want to start with the big guns, and that's how we got a lease with Grosvenor Estate. We leased 250,000 square foot of warehouse in Bermondsey. Simply by doing that, I emailed Charles Howard, who was the head of property at Grosvenor Estate, and we had a meeting, and that was that. We saved them about £60,000 in business rates. We got rent-free use of 3 enormous warehouses, which we used to fundraise by getting location hire in. So I mean, there's my advice would be start always when you're trying to engage landlords, council, private sector or public sector, start at the top.
Very good. We have an expression: start at the top of the pyramid. Yes, go for the highest rungs, and then you might get some action. Any other quick one from people, or we're run on 5 minutes, but there's lots of really useful information in there, Dan. Thank you so much. Any other questions or feedback, or people just want to say a last few things about what they thought about tonight or anything?
If anyone has any questions, sorry, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was going to congratulate you. I thought it was really excellent. And your business plan must have been a lot of harder work than what you made it sound like in this meeting. So thank you very much. It's really interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions for me, or I'm very happy to help. You can email me. I'll email I'm really sorry. I don't know how to use this stuff very
Chat
well.
down the bottom. If you go to one of them says chat, you should be able to type in your emails at the bottom. I've already put your website in and stuff. All right. Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, we've brought you some condensed wisdom from down the decades of creating space for community. So thank you very much to Dan. Thank you very much to everyone who's come along this week. Next week we have Tom from Take the Jump. I'll hand over to Dan for a quick tail end to say whatever you want or say goodbyes. Next week we've got Tom from Take the Jump. He was involved with writing the Green New Deal with the Jeremy Corbyn team. He's got a project called Take the Jump, about 6 things that anyone can do to help the environment in their life. And as he says, we know government's a business, got to change, but everyone can do a bit, their bit. And then the following week, we've got Rebecca Shaman from the National or British Hemp Alliance, talking about how hemp can create net zero and absorb a lot of CO2 and lots of good stuff. So once again, thank you very much, Dan. Absolutely informative. One of my go-to people to help me over the years and decades. Thank you very much for coming. Any parting words or comments? Thank you.
No. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope it was of some help.
Brilliant. So Dan's email in the chat. Do you want to tell me? I'll type it in. Dan at Interim Spaces, I'm guessing.
Yeah, Dan at interimspaces.co.uk.
.co.uk, and you can save the chat if you want. This, so I'll put that in. So Dan's email's there. If you want to put in 1 or 2 words about what you thought of tonight in the chat, and if you want to save the chat for all those community ownership fund and other useful bits of info, you can 3 dots down the bottom. It says save chat, and you can save it to your computer. That's what I do each week. All right, I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you very much, Dan, for the wisdom, and everyone for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Best of luck. See you soon.